afternoon, everybody. So, we've already had an episode of the Eurovision Song Contest. Now we're at the United Nations. It's a great joy for me personally to welcome you this afternoon to this conversation with Dr. Kieran Moriarty. Many of you know Kieran. He's our Emeritus Medical Director, many years of serving the Diocesan Salford and the Church Universal in various roles. But we're here today to rejoice in the gift of a miracle of Lourdes. The miracle happened, and we will hear more about it from Dr. Kieran shortly. The miracle happened, but it was quite some time in order for the miracle to be recognised and assessed. And it's fair, I don't wish to make him blush before he starts the conversation with us and the presentation today. It's fair to say that without Dr. Kieran's meticulous hard work with his collaborators, but Kieran's hard work enabling this miracle to be recognised and to be seen in the glory that God intends it to be. So it's a great joy for us to be here today to hear that one of our countrymen, just up the road, Liverpool, how through his witness the light of the resurrection shines anew in our lives. So it's a great pleasure for me to ask Kieran to share with us the journey and all that the Lord has blessed him in doing and being able to enable us to proclaim and rejoice in this miracle. So I'm going to invite Kieran to begin and talk to us shortly. Just to let you know, there will be time for some questions at the end of Kieran's presentation, and it is like the United Nations because the microphone in front of you, you'll be able to press a button and raise your question. Some of you youngsters, be very careful, it's not time to tell us jokes or anything else. Well, it might be, we'll see. So, Dr. Kieran, thank you very much for being with us. And
thank you, Father Jared. Can you hear all right at the back? Yeah. Thank you, Father Jared. It's a privilege to be asked to speak here today and to see such a wonderful attendance. Thank you for coming. I owe a great debt, firstly to Matthew Kang here, who has been absolutely fantastic with doing graphics and translations and all the IT. To Dr. D. Franciscus, permanent doctor in Lourdes, Monsignor Mikas, Bishop of Salford Diocesan, and Father Jared for his support. This story for me started around 1958. I'll tell you the story. There will be parts of the story which will make me cry, so you will have to be a bit patient at that time. I'm going to talk about Lourdes Miraculous cures, but specifically the cure of John Traynor, who is commonly known as Jack. I've been a member of the Lourdes International Medical Committee, which assesses miracles since 2004. I was previously a consultant physician and gastroenterologist at Royal Bolton Hospital. John was born in 1881 and he was cured in 1923, over 100 years ago. His Irish mother was from Derry and his father came from Ireland's Premier County, County Cork. John's mother instilled a deep devotion to Our Lady in him. He was accepted that he was genuine, truthful, humble, and he was a war hero. Everyone agreed on that. On the 8th of October 1914, at the Battle of Antwerp, he was carrying a wounded officer to safety, and he was hit with shrapnel in his head. He had an operation to remove that shrapnel. He was unconscious for 5 weeks. He didn't remember much about it. But when he recovered, he was sent to join the 1st Dublin Fusiliers at Gallipoli in 1915, which was a disaster. He again acted as a war hero. Father William Finn from Hull, he was, it's reckoned, the first Catholic chaplain to be killed in the First World War, and probably the first chaplain to be killed in the First World War. He received the Military Cross for his heroism. Many believed he should have received the Victoria Cross. John organised a party to cut Father Finn from the barbed wire, and they buried him on shore. On the 8th of May 1915, John was wounded with 3 bullets. 2 went right through his chest, and 1 lodged under his wing bone, under what's called the scapula. That bullet went through all the nerves that go down to supply sensation and motor function to the arm, what we call the brachial plexus. So John ended up with total paralysis of the right arm. The first operation was an emergency suture attempted repair of the nerves, and that was done in Alexandria by Sir Frederick Treves, who was the foremost surgeon of his day. He worked at the London Hospital in Whitechapel, one of my alma maters. He was a physician to the king and saved the life of Edward VII by doing the first proper appendix removal. And he's best known for the fact that he rescued Joseph Merrick, the so-called elephant man who was been kept in peep shows, and he rescued him and put him up in a room in comfort at the London Hospital. A wonderful man, very moving. On the voyage home from Alexandria, John had bleeding blood vessels in his right armpit, and he also had his first epileptic fit. Again, they tied off the nerves, but again, without any success. In 1915, there was a third unsuccessful attempt to sew the nerves together. He repeatedly refused amputation to have the arm removed, and he was given an 80% pension. In August of 1916, he went before the medical board of the Ministry of Pensions, who concluded there was no possibility at all of his using his right arm, and it increased his pension to 100%. Late in 1916, he saw 2 Liverpool nerves muscle specialists, and there was a 4th attempt to sew the nerves together, again unsuccessful. Sadly, by April of 1920, his fits were becoming more and more frequent, and a Dr. Montserrat did an operation where he removed a piece of the skull on the side, what we call the parietal bone, supposedly to reduce pressure in the brain. This operation had no medical basis whatsoever, and it did no good for regarding his fits. And unfortunately, following that, he had partial paralysis of both legs. He couldn't walk. And also, in association with that, he became incontinent of urine and of feces. Between 1915 and 1920, he saw 10 doctors and had 16 operations. And between 1915 and 1923, he spent 5 years in hospital and received the last sacraments many times. On the 24th of July 1923, it was planned for him to be admitted to what was called Mostly Hill Hospital for incurables. It was what's called an epilepsy colony. But he had already made his mind up to go on the very first Liverpool Archdiocese Lourdes Pilgrimage, and he left on the 22nd of July 1923. The cost was £13. He used his gold sovereign as a down payment, and his wife Mary Ellen pawned some jewellery, and they sold some belongings. He was very ill on the train and he had fits. They stopped the train 3 times to take him off, but there was no local hospital. Oh gosh, it's gone. But there was no local hospital, so they carried on. In essence, and this was the bit that I was quite pleased with, I separated out his conditions into 5 medical and surgical diagnoses. He had the fits, the epilepsy, the paralysis of both legs, a large ulcer on his arm and bed sores from the paralysis of his right arm, and now the surgical hole in the skull revealing brain pulsation, and that was covered with a metal plate. He had 9 baths, but he had no fix after the 3rd bath. On the 25th of July, he moved his legs in the 9th bath, and he was then taken to the Blessed Sacrament procession, where after he was blessed by the Archbishop of Reims, he was able to bless himself with his right arm. The following morning, he ran 200 metres barefoot in his night clothes to Our Lady's grotto. His right arm movement was noted to be markedly improved, and his ulcers and sores had healed, and the skull hole was much smaller. The important thing was that the 3 Liverpool doctors, Azurdia, Finn and Marley, had examined John the day before his cure, the evening of his cure, and on the 27th. And so they had documented, they had written down their findings, and so this is the very best documentation we had of any possible Lourdes cure. That just shows the Blessed Sacrament procession that we will be going to shortly. That's in the underground basilica. In John's time, all of the Blessed Sacrament processions were in the heat on the Esplanade. On the way home, John was given a first-class compartment, even though he didn't want it, but he still managed to help with the sick on his way home. Archbishop Keating, the leader of the pilgrimage, went into John's carriage, and John knelt down to get his blessing, at which the Archbishop got the honour to stand up and said, "John, I think it's you who needs my blessing," and the two of them then sat down and cried. The Archbishop explained to John that he had had a miraculous cure through the intercession of Our Lady, and Archbishop Keating had made diary entries and then subsequently addressed the crowd when the pilgrimage arrived at Liverpool Lime Street. There was a jubilant crowd at Liverpool because the word had got back from Lourdes, and my grandparents from Widnes in the Archdiocese were there on the station. I was brought up with this cure, perhaps from the age of about 8, and in 1958 my Auntie Margaret was very pious, went to Lourdes for the centenary celebration and brought me back one of those snowflake globes of Our Lady and St. Bernadette. Our Lady and St. Bernadette, and if you turn them upside down, then snowflakes came down on St. Bernadette. In those very innocent pre-mobile phone, pre-TikTok days, I was quite happy to soothe myself off to sleep with just turning it up and down a few times at night. I came to Lourdes first in 1971, and like many people in the UK and Ireland, I believed that this was recognised as a miracle. But when I went to the Lourdes Bureau of Medical Observations, I realised that the cure had not been recognised as miraculous, although there was a unique 2-page bulletin on the John Traynor cure. It was the only one which had not been recognised. All the other bulletins were on recognised cure. I did notice that there was no cure from Great Britain on Ireland, and it did just strike me that one day I might just be able to do something about that. In 2004, I was appointed a member of the Lourdes International Medical Committee, and I looked at John Traynor's notes. His dossier was very limited, and in 2006 I went through the dossier, and again in 2018, and concluded that there wasn't enough evidence for the cure to be recognised as being medically inexplicable. I'll emphasise that as doctors, all we decide is whether a cure is medically explicable or inexplicable. It's the bishop of the diocese who decides if it's going to be a miracle. Very important, and I'll re-emphasise that. The other point that I realised was that I knew that all of the previous Lourdes cures had been recognised in living pilgrims and John was dead, and I believed that and I'd been told that the Church did not recognise miraculous cures in people who had died. However, since 2021, I've served on a diocesan board of inquiry into a possible miraculous cure associated with sainthood from the Vatican. And in the what's called the dicastery for the causes of the saints, the organisation that assesses miraculous cures, I read a document called Sanctorum Martyr, and I made the crucial realisation, and then shared it widely, that cures being considered by the Vatican can be recognised as miraculous even when the cured person has died. That's the front page of John's dossier from 1923, very limited. In August of 2023, to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the first Liverpool pilgrimage, Dr. De Franciscus, the current president of the Medical Bureau, asked me to review John Traynor's Lourdes dossier with a view to presenting it at our October meeting and to explain why it had failed to be recognised as a miracle. I was a bit reluctant to do this. I didn't really see much point in going over something that I thought was going to have a negative result, but I did it anyway. And I noticed for the very first time the potential importance of a reference in the report of the cure that was published in what's called the Annals de Notre Dame de Lourdes, and that was published in February of 1927. That was just a document for the chaplains of Lourdes. It wasn't the official document. But I asked Dr. De Franciscus to get it out from the archives, and they did that. They found the original, and Matthew Can, who helped me here, he produced an English translation. And the report was signed off by Dr. Valle, who was the acting president of the Bureau of Medical Observations, following an examination of John 3 years later in July 1926. And importantly, the 3 Liverpool doctors, Azurdi, Amali and Finn, were at that examination together with Dr. Harrington and Milkins. And Dr. Valle concluded it's a true resurrection which this fortunate beneficiary attributes to the power of God and the merciful intercession of Our Lady of Lourdes. As for us, obliged to confine ourselves to our role as doctors, we recognise and proclaim, along with our brothers, fellow doctors, that the process of this prodigious cure is absolutely outside and above the forces of nature. They looked at the overall cure, and several days later they asked themselves 4 questions. Number 1, did a real disease exist? Yes. Number 2, is there a complete cure or just obvious improvement? Yes, there was a complete cure. There was slight clawing of the hand, and the arm, there was slight weakness of the muscles of the arm, and the opening on the skull had not completely closed, but largely. But essentially, he had made a very major improvement. They said, is there any need to delay coming to a decision? No. And can the cure be accounted for in terms of a natural process? No. It was an immediate cure, and the cure was confirmed after 3 years observation. So in September of 2023, encouraged by this report, I spent 2 days in the archives of Liverpool Metropolitan Cathedral, assisted by their superb archivist Neil Sayre. And there I found a copy of the Journal de la Grotte de Lourdes, which was published in December of 1926. It was very old, 50% destroyed, and the content was identical to the Annals report of the following year, February, but this now was the official report of the Medical Bureau, which was very important because official reports, nobody ever goes back and alters those. Unfortunately, Dr. Valle's report was never translated and never sent from Lourdes to Liverpool. In fact, no Lourdes cure was referred to a diocesan bishop between 1913 and 1926. There were a number of important publications in the Liverpool archives, the main one being a thesis by Dr. McQueen from Dundee. He took the time off work. He was a lecturer in physiology, and he wrote a 340-page thesis, a critical study of the Lourdes cure, which had a huge amount of information from family members, Ministry of Pensions, doctors at the time, and was a great help to me. Actually, I planned to go up to Dundee for 2 days the following week, and I didn't need to because it was there. And actually, that was providential because I became very unwell in that week and wouldn't have been able to make it. It was George Harrison who'd written the story of John Traynor, very helpful information. There was a negative report by Dr. Smits and Dr. Dowling, two English members of the International Medical Committee, which had put me off in the past. But there was, and I'm sure some of you have seen this, in 1944, the Reverend Patrick O'Connor wrote a Catholic Truth Society pamphlet, I Met a Miracle, the story of Jack Traynor. And that detailed a 10-hour conversation he had with John in 1937. If you Google that up, it's produced in entirety. And if you want to click on a video by Father Martin Mary, that discusses the case again virtually fully. Between 1923, his cure, 1943, John had excellent health. There were excellent witnesses, particularly Mary Ellen, his wife, his daughter Mary Cullen and her husband Joe Cullen. They lived with John and Mary Ellen, and they were excellent witnesses. Mary had helped look after John and dressed the arm on his wound. Joe had helped lift John on his back. Joe was a small man, but had to take John up to bed, carrying him on his back, and if he was late from work, Mary and Mary Ellen used to carry him up. When John was cured, he came back as a brancardier every year from 1924. In December 1943, he died from the complications of an unrelated hernia. When we were assessing the cures in Lourdes and in the Vatican, we assess them according to the Lambertini criteria. Try not to be too technical, but these were formulated in the early 1730s by Cardinal Lambertini, who went on to become Pope Benedict XIV. Criteria are that disease must be serious or impossible to cure by human means. It must not be at a stage where it can disappear by itself. Either no medical treatment must have been given, or it's certain that the treatment has been ineffective. The cure must be instantaneous, it must be complete, it must be permanent, and the cure must not be preceded by an event such as a psychological or psychiatric crisis. As I say, the thing I was most pleased with was separating out the 5 diagnoses and assessing them in the context of Dr. Vallet's report. We stress that those 7 criteria should not just be considered individually, but should be considered together. And again, that Dr. Vallet's 1926 report is official and will never be changed. People have argued that the cure did not satisfy the Lambertini criteria. And the first reservation was that 1926, when John was examined, he still had this slight clawing of the right hand, and there was a slight difference in the slight wasting of his forearm. And second reservation was that there was a very slight indentation in his skull. The hole had not completely healed. I produced a 19-page report for Archbishop McMahon, the Archbishop of Liverpool, and I identified and separated out those 5 conditions from which John was cured. And I emphasised that in 1923 he was instantly cured of his fits, his epilepsy, his paraplegia of the legs, weakness of the legs, and of his severe arms and his severe sores and his arm ulcers, and those and his double incontinence as well. And those 3 cures satisfied all 7 of the Lambertini criteria. The cure of the right arm with the persistent clawing and strictly fulfills only the first three criteria and the last one. The muscles only grew back steadily over 3 years, but it's clearly medically inexplicable that this man with a completely paralysed arm, who had been advised to have it amputated on several occasions, with gross muscle wasting and impaired sensation, and his daughter said it was held on by catgut, that subsequently he was able to work as a coal merchant and lift bags of coal weighing 200 pounds. That is just medically inexplicable. And similarly, the hole in the side of his head healed gradually over the 3 years. In a medically inexplicable cure in Lourdes, and also in the Vatican, there's virtually always just one diagnosis to consider. And if cure from that single diagnosis is accepted, it's sufficient for just the one cure to that be described as medically inexplicable and then recognised as a miracle. John was uniquely cured from 5 conditions. In July of 2024, Dr. D. Franciscus and I collated documents for Monsignor Mikas, the Bishop of Tarbes and Lourdes, who was extremely supportive, and we sent them off 8 documents and sent them to Archbishop McMahon of Liverpool. And on the 29th of November 2024, Archbishop McMahon convened what's called a Canonical Commission in Liverpool. I appeared in person as a witness, and Dr. D. Franciscus appeared online. I was questioned for an hour. In fact, they just let me talk for an hour. I thought they'd ask questions, but they waited till the end and then just asked a few questions. They asked me to wait in a waiting room. And then the Archbishop invited me back in and told me that he intended to declare the cure a miracle. I just wept at the enormity of the word miracle and the relief. On the 8th of December 2024, the feast of the Immaculate Conception, Teresa, my wife, and Catherine, my daughter, and I were privileged to be in the Metropolitan Cathedral of Christ the King, Liverpool, with members of John Traynor's family to hear Archbishop McMahon's declaration. His declaration was, given the weight of medical evidence, the testimony to the faith of John Traynor and his devotion to our Blessed Lady, it is with great joy that I declare that the cure of John Traynor from multiple serious medical conditions is to be recognised as a miracle wrought by the power of God through the intercession of Our Lady of Lourdes. And then at the 18th of February this year, they held a wonderful celebration mass in Liverpool Cathedral. And during the Liverpool pilgrimage recently, they held a celebration mass in Lourdes. I just put these publications up in the slide. I'm hoping these slides are going to go on the website. So if you're interested in further reading, you can access those. The first one is my account of the cure that's in the tablet, the Catholic Weekly. The second one in the Liverpool paper, the Catholic Pictorial. And if you're interested in a 45-minute talk I gave on miraculous cures in Lourdes and also in the Vatican, then I gave a Zoom presentation in 2021, and that's the Zoom link if you want to access that. Moving on then to the 18 apparitions of Our Lady to St. Bernadette between February the 11th and July the 16th, 1858. On February the 11th, the Lady all in white appeared at the grotto. February the 18th, the third one, Our Lady said to Bernadette, I do not promise to make you happy in this world, but in the other. Would you do me the favour of coming here for a fortnight? The 8th, message of prayer for sinners in penance. At the 9th, the spring was discovered and Bernadette drank from that. At the 12th apparition, there was the first miracle. A lady called Catherine Latapie, with a very badly dislocated arm, that was healed in the water. On the 13th, Our Lady said, "Go and tell the priest that the people should come here in procession and that a chapel should be built here." Abbe Perimal was the priest in Lourdes at the time, and he pressed Bernadette to ask Our Lady what her name was. And on the Feast of the Annunciation, the 16th apparition, Our Lady said, "I am the Immaculate Conception." I think it's pronounced in the local dialect, Que Soyera Immaculada Conception. When Bernadette ran from the grotto, she kept repeating those words to herself. She was only 14 years old, very little education, and when she told them to Abbe Perimal, you can imagine what he felt. He realised the truth of the apparitions. Our Lady appeared at the 17th, where Bernadette put her hand through a candle which didn't burn herself. And the last apparition, the 18th, was on the Feast of the Lady of Mount Carmel. Bernadette went to a convent in Nevers, but at the age of 35 she developed tuberculosis and died, and she was proclaimed a saint by Pope Pius the 9th on the 8th of December 1933. The important thing about the Immaculate Conception was that it had only been there were only ever two ex-cathedra statements by popes in history. One was in 1854, that's the ex-cathedra statement, the dogma of the Immaculate Conception, and the other is also about Our Lady in 1950, that the Feast of the Assumption is dogma. So her appearance was just 4 years after that ex-cathedra statement. What is a miracle? It comes from the Latin meaning surprise. There is both a medical or a scientific aspect to it and a spiritual aspect to it. On one definition, it's an extraordinary event believed to be due to a benevolent divine intervention to which is attached spiritual significance. In the Gospels, there are reports of 17 miraculous healings. The first miracle at Cana wasn't a miraculous healing, but it showed the strong bond, I think, of Our Lady's intercession with Lourdes, which is what is reflected in the Lourdes miracle. Interestingly, listening today, that miracle at Cana, turning the water into wine, is called a miracle of multiplication. And St. John Vianney, whose feast was celebrated today, the patron saint of parish priest, he performed a virtually identical miracle with wine during his lifetime. Another example of multiplication would be the feeding of the 5,000, which was the gospel reading today. The other Vatican group of miracles the Vatican recognises medical healings. They're about 95% of the healings, but 5% are others, these multiplication ones, and the other ones escaping from danger. For example, like the angel leading Peter from the jail. What comments have been made? God is so stirs for our love that he grabs our attention by performing miracles. Ben Gurion, anyone who doesn't believe in miracles is not a realist. Pascal, God sheds sufficient light on miracles for the believer to believe, but leaves enough shadow for the unbeliever not to. Bernadette said, "My task is to give you the message, not to make you believe it." And I'm sure many of you have seen that Hollywood film, The Song of Bernadette. It is based on a book called The Song of Bernadette by Franz Werfel, who was a Czechoslovakian Jew who escaped from the Nazis and was sheltered in Lourdes, and he vowed that if he ever got through the war, he would write that book, and he did. And if you look on the tablet at the start of the film, it said, "For those who believe in God, no explanation is necessary, and for those who do not believe in God, no explanation is possible." A miracle has 4 characteristics. Firstly, that it is done by God. It's not done with the power of God, like, for example, transubstantiation at the Eucharist. It's beyond all possible reason or possible explanation. And it's also comes to confirm the faith of someone like John Traynor, or, when we're talking about sainthood, to give witness to the holiness of that person who becomes a saint. When we talk about the word discernment, discernment means judgment. It's got a sort of holy aspect to it, but really it means assessment in lay terms. And miracles are assessed, as I said, at two levels. Firstly, the medical or scientific level, where the doctor carries out their work of assessment with rigour, depending on our experience and our formation. And then the spiritual aspect, which is situated, as I say, in the light of faith, and that generally falls to the bishop of the diocese of the person who is healed. The history of the International Medical Committee, it was set up in 1858. Dr. Duzu recorded more than 100 cures. Between 1859 and 1914, there was 4,000 cures recorded, but the documentation was very poor. Professor Verges was put in charge of cures in 1859. In 1862, Monsignor Lawrence, the Bishop of Lourdes, conducted an inquiry into the events at Lourdes, and he recognised that the apparitions had occurred, and he recognised the first 7 miraculous cures in 1862. There was then a very long period from 1862 to 1907, 1908, when no cures were recognised. And then 1908, they thought, well, it's 50 years on from the apparition, and they went and looked into some cures. And between 1908 and 13, there were 33 miraculous cures recognised, but then, as I said, none between 1913 and 1946. Pope Pius the X wanted some better assessment done of miracles, and in 1927 Dr. Ballet set up the International Medical Association. But again, things weren't really functioning. I think that they only started again in 1947 when the National Medical Committee was established, but that consisted entirely of French doctors. And then in 1954, the International Medical Committee, the CMIL, was established. That's about 30 of us, half of whom come from France and half from the rest of the world. What about the setting of miracles in Lourdes? More than 80% of the miracles have occurred in women. It's generally believed, as we all know, that women are far more holy than men. The youngest miracle occurred in a 2-year-old. The country of origin is there: France 56, Italy 9, Belgium 3, Germany 1, Austria 1, Switzerland 1, and now England 1. 6 of the miracles relate to the intercession of Our Lady of Lourdes, but occurred outside of Lourdes. And the majority of the miracles, 52 of them, were related to bathing in the baths. Of the 72 miracles now, there's been an extra one recognised this year. In the 19th century, there was no cure for tuberculosis, so a good number of the 27 of the cures were recognised has been due to tuberculosis. There were other infections, paralysis, like with John, heart ones, cancers, probably vision, muscles and joints, and cachexia means someone who was just wasting away. As regards the International Medical Committee, we have co-presidents. There's Monsignor Mikas, the Bishop of Lourdes, who gives a spiritual direction, but he does not vote. Professor Jean Kay is the co-president from Montpellier, and then Dr. D. Franciscus, who's here. I won't embarrass him by saying what a tremendous job he has done since he took over on the Medical Bureau in 2009. All of the meetings in the past used to be in French, and you used to have to sit near to someone who spoke French who explained something to you. He now gives us a full report in our own language before the meeting, and he's fluent in English, French and Italian, and it has made a huge difference and has resulted in that in fact since he started there have been 5 miraculous cures recognised, whereas in the 30 years prior to that there were only 3. Just a reminder of the Lambertini criteria, which is how we assess the cures on the Medical Bureau. This looks at Lambertini criteria in Lourdes in harmony with Dr. De Francesco. Normally acquires the case details. He has a look that can the criteria be met. He will only proceed if so, and then he will close the case if the case doesn't look promising. It's a bit complicated, but this is how we go about assessing the cure. The first stage is the person who feels that they're cured will voluntarily go along to De Franciscus in the Medical Bureau and say, I think I've been cured. A lot of people don't do that because they don't want the fuss that is involved, but some do. And then he conducts an initial scrutiny and evaluation, and there may be 40 or 50 pilgrims a year who go to him believing they've been cured, usually of minor illness, and they're briefly mentioned at our annual meeting in October or November. There might be 5 or 6 more significant ones that we discuss fully at the annual meeting. In the time I've been on the committee, there have only been about between sometimes no detailed dossiers, sometimes 2 that have been prepared and presented to the meeting, and that's usually done by 1 or 2 expert doctors. If the case looks promising, there'll be a continuing review over a number of years of the patient, of the pilgrim, cured pilgrim, and Dr. De Franciscus will have to get the medical documentation from the country, place where the person came from. That was why the train cure was so tremendous, because the documentation was all there. He might, if the pilgrim is in Lourdes, he will convene a meeting, as he did the other day, for the 72nd miracle, where the person is there and the doctors, any doctor in Lourdes can go and make an assessment. And that's all helpful to us from when the case comes to us on the International Committee. When a case is discussed, it has to be a 2/3 majority for it to be recognised as medically inexplicable. There have been 2 cures, we recognised 2 in 2011 and 1 in 2016 and 1 in 2024. All of them have gone on and been declared miraculous by the bishop. The intercession of Our Lady is essential, and Bishop McMahon guides us spiritually. I feel a very big responsibility. I know many of our members feel the same, that if a cure is recognised as miraculous, it is part of church history forevermore, and certainly we wouldn't want to be associated with a case that's a mistake. As I mentioned, and just stress again, medically inexplicable cures, Bishop McMahon, if we assess one, he will write to the Bishop of the Diocese. The Bishop then will normally set up a canonical commission like I described, and then he will make the official proclamation. If you get time, the Bureau of Medical Observations is just on there. If you go out of here and to the left, if you go up to the first floor, there's a wonderful display of many of the cures that have occurred in Lourdes. It's Matthew and Dr. De Franciscus have put a lot of effort in there. I think I'll just mention this Vittorio Micheli cure very briefly, because it's one that had a major impact on me, and it's different from the Traynor cure, which didn't go through the normal channels. The Micheli cure did go through the normal channels. He was born in 1940, he was a soldier, he developed pain in his left hip and leg, and when they x-rayed it, the hip joint was completely destroyed. They did a biopsy, they took a piece of the bone and found that he had a very nasty bone cancer, what we call a sarcoma. He had no treatment at all, no treatment, and he spent a year in hospital. he became too weak for any kind of treatment, and he was put in a plaster cast from his pelvis to his foot. He came to Lourdes in June of 1963 and visited the baths. He felt nothing much happened when he was here, but when he went back to Trento Hospital in Italy, he found that his pain had gone, his appetite returned, and he started to eat again. He got rid of his crutches and found he could walk. But it took the doctors some time to take his cast off, and when they did, they found when they x-rayed his hip joint that it had restored back to normal, and he was able to walk, and he was cured. He's been a bronchitis for many years since. I met him a few years ago. His cure was assessed by the Medical Bureau and then by the International Medical Committee as medically inexplicable, and it was declared a miracle. To me, a cancer that's not been treated in any way, shape or form, which is cured, is perhaps the most compelling evidence of a miraculous cure. That is Sister Bernadette Morio, who was the 70th miraculous cure. Sister Bernadette, she's actually in the chapel, the Cosmos and Damien Chapel, giving thanks. She's a nun. Of the 72 cures, 10 have occurred in nuns, 3 have occurred in priests, and none have occurred in doctors. Well, we talked about miracles, but the message of Lourdes it's the message that the lay public and the media link with Lourdes Miraculous cures. Prior to COVID, there were about 6 million visitors to Lourdes every year. The numbers dropped right off, but they've been picking up again. As I mentioned, they've been looking through the literature, something like 7,000 cures, 2,000 unexplained, but until the miraculous, the Traynor one, there'd only been 70 miraculous cured, and now there's 72. My observation, I know from what many people say, is that most sick and disabled pilgrims and most pilgrims without disability come to Lourdes to find courage and resignation to help cope with suffering rather than to have a miraculous cure, and that pilgrims old and young come to Lourdes for prayer, penance, procession and grace. And Bishop Perrier was the previous Bishop of Lourdes. He said that for the Church, as well as for the believer, a pilgrimage to Mary is more than a journey to a miracle. It is a journey of love, of prayer, and of the suffering community. There is a picture of the Salford Children and Families group leading the torchlight procession a few years. You can see our president there up at the front. I did promise her that she would feature. I think it's very edifying to all of us who are older to see the Children and Families group and younger people coming in and bonding with people who are like-minded and establishing relationships that last forever. Some marry, then bring their own children back. That's the front page of Katina. I hope that many of you young people have applied to the Katina Association for bursaries to come to Lourdes. They do give bursaries. It was £100. I've been pushing them to push it up to 150. I know they were giving that for HCPT. I was trying to make the case out that they should give the same for Lourdes, but at least it's a start. And as we all know, pilgrimage is very expensive. Of the previous 70 miraculous cures, now 72, 71 of them were from continental Europe, one of which was Algeria. This Lourdes Traynor cure is the first from the rest of the world, and there has been a lot of interest worldwide, not especially Liverpool, the UK and Ireland. In October 2023, I was meant to present my findings to the International Medical Committee, but I became seriously ill with an infected heart valve and sepsis, and I insisted to the nurses in the hospital that they give me a side room hooked up to the drip to present the case by Zoom to the meeting. They thought I was quite mad, and in fact I hardly remember a thing I said, and I thought I'd blown it. But fortunately, Dr. D. Franciscus over there, he encouraged me and we got it together when I came in July of 2024. When I was waiting at the Canonical Commission, I reflected on the cure, and it had been a life experience for me since 1958. All my experience as doctor and a pilgrim, and been brought up with the cure. I thought to myself, well, what's happened? What's brought this all about? I was mindful of the words of, I'm not pious, but I was mindful of the words of St. John Henry Newman, who said, God has created me to do him some definite service. He has committed some work to me, which is not committed to another, although I suppose far more likely a word from John Traynor himself, grandpa, parents of my mum, to Our Lady for her intercession. Of course, not forgetting